I'm Ann Sullivan. Madison Services Group is my company. I've had it for 20 years. I started it because one day I woke up and said, hmm, why am I paying a firm 2/3 of the revenue that I'm getting? And I'm only keeping a third. Something is really wrong with me. Why don't I just start a company and take 100%? And that's really where I started from. Shortly thereafter, every entrepreneur has dumb luck. So I sent a 1 sentence email to what became my first client, just kind of saying, like, oh, I see you're in California and I'm in Washington. You need any help by any chance? And yeah, meet my partner. 3 days later, we're coming to Washington. So again, kind of dumb luck that I started out with, and then just consistently grew the business, and had a really successful run for the last 20 years.
Wow, that is amazing. And that was a great starting story. It's a very good idea. It makes sense. And so you talked a little bit about how you got started. Did you have any other inspirations or role models and mentors?
Well, I didn't, because women in the public policy lobbying arena, first of all, there weren't very many of them that even worked for anybody, and second of all, there were I remember there was one other company that was woman owned, that was in the government affairs space, and we work with Congress and the White House, so it doesn't attract shrinking violets, let me just put it that way.
Hmm.
um, and so I had no mentors, like I had to make this all on my
That is amazing. And it's great that you can be a mentor now to all the women
yeah
that are coming after you and these girls.
yeah, that's the point, isn't it? The point is to break a glass ceiling, or whatever you want to call it, break barriers, so that the next generation doesn't have to work as hard as you did to get to the point that you are now. So
Right. Always pass it along, pass it
thank
down.
you, thank you, thank you.
And what would you tell a girl who feels like she's too young or too inexperienced to start a company, or maybe she's going into an industry like you that's pretty male dominated?
I would say that, really the success to entrepreneurship is having a vision that you can execute on, having the confidence to pursue it, knowing when to continue it, but also knowing if you need to discontinue it, right?
Uh-huh.
But really, it's all about you, and that can come at age, 12, 7, whenever, in your 20s, in your 30s. A lot of people hit their stride when they're 50s, in their 50s, because they've always worked for somebody else. They didn't have the courage to go out and try it. So really, women of all ages, it's the principles that are important rather than the age. So
That
if you've
is
got a good idea, go for it.
that's a great way to put it. Thank you. And once they have their idea and they're ready to pursue it, what do you think is most important first step starting a company?
I don't think you can be risk adverse. So I think the first thing is uh, plan to take risks, because being an entrepreneur requires capital. So, wherever you get it or however you manage, that's a risk. When I started my company, I was really worried, like, am I putting my family, I had 2 kids at that time, right? Am I putting my whole family at risk? What if this doesn't work, right?
Yeah.
um, so can't be risk adverse. Know that you're going to have to make some decisions um, that will put you at risk. Otherwise, you can never succeed in business, because business is a risk. That's the first thing. The second thing I would say is uh, it requires confidence in your instincts and your abilities. nobody else is going to give that to you. Like, you have to be sure about it. And you really, there's all kinds of people that will throw up barriers, that will be happy to say no, but it's that one or two people that say, that validate it. Yeah, yes, that's a good idea. Those are the ones you need to listen to.
Definitely. That's a great piece of advice. Thank you. And what do you think are the top 3 skills someone needs to be a successful entrepreneur?
Well, it helps if you have an expertise in something, right? So that's like, do you bring a skill set to the table? Because and that can be, the ability to create. It doesn't have to be a concrete skill set, but you need some kind of skill set to execute and set you apart from everybody else. There are plenty of generalists in this world that have made a fine living doing whatever they're doing. But the ones that really succeed are the ones that have developed a skill set and then know how to turn it into a business. Um, I would say self-confidence is just important, because, as I mentioned before, people are happy to give you barriers, are happy to tell you no, but don't listen to them. If your instincts tell you that you're on the right track, then believe in it enough to pursue it.
Yeah,
And I think the third thing is just, don't be afraid to fail. Like, the downside is you could fail, but so what? In an entrepreneur's mind, it was better to have tried and failed than not tried at all.
definitely. That is one of the best lines in the business. With your entire career, I'm sure you faced ups and downs as an entrepreneur. So, what are some of the difficult or most disappointing parts about entrepreneurship for you?
Well, as I said before, if you're my age, you've broken through plenty of barriers, right? So I think the most disappointing thing is when you hit a barrier that you just can't move. So in my world, that means you've done everything right, you've set everything up, but in the end, the piece of legislation that you tried to move didn't, for reasons that were not your fault, couldn't be helped, were up to elected officials that misbehaved, or, there's a whole variety of reasons why something doesn't go forward.
Mhm.
That's a disappointment, because really you did everything right. You organized the voice of, in this case, women business owners is one of the voices that I have really developed. So that is a disappointment. Everything else, you can pretty much tough your way through.
And when you do face other setbacks, how do you tough your way through?
Well, COVID's a really good example. So uh, the first thing that goes by the wayside are consultant contracts when things aren't going right, right? And we're policy consultants to companies, corporations, organizations, right? So what's the first thing to go? It's those contracts. So it's required me to pivot and create. So for 20 years, I've had clients for 20 years, for all 20 years. I mean, people don't go a lot of different, places once they're with us. But it required me to get creative in understanding that uh, the money that I'm used to creating with corporations and organizations is
Mhm.
not necessarily what's going to generate revenue in a COVID situation. So we've had to pivot, and it's good. We've come up with two really great coalitions that I might not have thought of had I, rested contently servicing the clients that I already had.
One door closes, another one opens.
Yep, Exactly.
And what have been the most satisfying moments of your career?
One of the most, so there's really two that come to mind. I mean, there's lots of them, but
Yeah.
so one of them was women entrepreneurs were only awarded 2.3% when I started this venture, 2.3% of all federal government contracts,
Oh my gosh.
which is abysmal, right? So I worked for 11 years to get a program in place to set aside contracts for women only to bid on,
Mhm.
because that was the only way they were going to get contracts, is if we set them aside for that, for only women to bid on, and then the government had to award at least to one
Yeah.
woman, right? So I worked on that for 11 years, and lots of no's, and I mean, just it was an incredible effort, and we engaged women from all over the country, many of whom are still my friends. So in the end, the latest figures show that women entrepreneurs are now awarded 5% of all federal contracts. That is billions and billions and billions of dollars. So that makes me very proud. The
Wow.
second, the second highlight for me was a hearing on women's entrepreneurship in the U.S. Senate. Um, I decided, along with a client and helping them, we decided, there needs to be more attention. This was 5 years ago. There just needs to be more attention brought to women entrepreneurs. People aren't listening enough. The US Senate isn't passing enough legislation. There's not enough changes. Why don't we put together a hearing, a committee hearing, to highlight that? So we told the committee, you need to get the biggest hearing room there is in the United States Senate. Don't give us some little dinky one, right? We're going to fill the biggest one you have. We reached out to Barbara Corcoran, who's on Shark Tank,
Mhm.
and said, would you like to come and speak on this? And she was a witness. Nellie Galan is another trailblazer in the Latina community. She was another witness. And then we had two women that own businesses that were also witnesses. So all talking about what can we do to propel women businesses forward, right? That was the subject. Usually maybe two members of Congress show up at a hearing. And it turns out the staff didn't have confidence that we would fill the biggest room. And it was a room where, like, the big, important,
Yeah.
judicial hearing, the big ones you see on TV, right?
Mhm. Yeah.
It was enormous, and it held about, I would say, 400 people, right? So they didn't
Wow.
have confidence in we can fill the biggest room, just try us, right? So they had the janitors only have the room half full with seats. Well, when the doors opened, women streamed through the doors, right? They're like frantically calling the janitor, saying, get down here, get these chairs. There are hundreds of women here.
Oh my god.
There was standing room only. Then, so that word got around, right? So senators started tweeting each other. We had every member of the committee show up, which is like 12 people, right?
Oh my god.
12 senators. And at one point, the chair sent a note to her chief of staff saying, this is not a hearing, this is a rally. Because, of course, when somebody said something they liked, the women all cheered. It was just a great, great moment of my career to have kind of everything that I've worked for come together in that kind of forum.
That is incredible, and I'm sure you've been thanked a million times for all
I
your
have.
progress in those, but thank
It has,
you.
yeah, it has not gone unnoticed yet.
That is amazing. Clearly, you've made tons of strides for women in business and entrepreneurship, and I know you focus on them, especially with small businesses. So, what are some of the ways that you address the gender gap in the entrepreneurial space specifically?
Well, so there's two things that set women apart from their male counterparts, according to a couple of studies kind of recent studies.
Hmm.
One is they're stuck with trying to figure out how to deal with childcare. It's on them. It's not on the father, generally speaking. It's on them. So without kids, so you can work, is a huge setback for women that are pursuing entrepreneurship. The, so, women try to fund their businesses through their own cash, right?
Hmm.
It's been shown that men will gladly hop off to the local bank and try to get a loan, or, undaunted, they look for capital.
Yeah.
And women are much more reticent to look for capital and tend to try to do it on their own. And that really hampers. In fact, only 4% of all commercial loan dollars go to women entrepreneurs.
Wow.
So it's a huge gap, and also a huge reason why equality, is still far from, we haven't reached equality
Yeah.
any stretch of the imagination.
Wow. Well, thank you for women like you out there trailblazing. And how do you address diversity in your workplace?
That's really, really important. In my industry, so where do we get people from? Generally, we get them from people who've worked on the Hill or at the White House
Hmm.
or in some kind of, public entity. And the majority of so finding minority applicants is really, really difficult in my industry, uh, because Congress for the most part is hiring white males, white women, and diversity has just, I'd say, in the last 5 years maybe, have people really made an effort. Now, the White House under Obama made a huge effort, and it was very evident. And so some successful candidates for jobs have come out of that pipeline.
Hmm.
But my particular industry has a long way to go. So it's really hard for me to find, to be diverse. I've had a little better luck finding contractors
Hmm.
that are women of color or men of color. That's been a little easier, but finding full-time workers is really hard in my industry, and we look really hard for those folks.
I bet. Well, I hope it gets better day by day in the
It
coming
has
years.
to, right?
Yeah, definitely. And I saw that on your website, your company is entirely women owned. Do you only employ women too for all positions?
No, for in my 20 years, I've had all male teams, I've had all female teams, I've had a mix. It's been everything. I
Wow.
mean, really, I go back to really, I just want the best people for the job.
Yeah,
So that's kind of how we work. And it's been generally speaking, it's been a mix of folks.
that's super cool. You just get to change it whenever,
Yep.
all the time.
Yep.
So I have a few more questions, and they're some fun little ones.
Okay.
So, if you could travel back in time to the founding of your company and give yourself a piece of advice, what would you say?
Don't listen to everybody who tells you no. I got I got so many no's. It was just incredible. But there was one congressman who said yes. Oh yeah, you can do that. That's a great idea. And I was off to the races. I only needed one person to validate it.
That is a really good piece of advice to keep in mind, especially as an entrepreneur. I mean,
Yeah.
that might be the first step is getting
People
your
don't,
first no.
yeah, people don't see your vision, you know? They don't see what you see. They don't see the potential you see. So no is a really easy answer.
Definitely.
Mm.
And when you have big accomplishments like those two you mentioned before, or throughout the rest of your career, how do you celebrate?
I probably have, I usually have a break out a bottle of champagne and for my team. And we
Yeah,
just sit around and have a glass of champagne.
that's so fun. That's like the movies. This one is a little oddball, so it might take a little bit to think, but what is your favorite word?
I'm sorry you broke up. Trying again.
Oh, sorry. This is an
Oh, you
oddball question.
froze. No.
Can you hear me?
Yeah,
Back? Okay, great. What is your favorite word?
success.
That's a good one. That's
I
a
mean, that's really the driver, right? If you're an entrepreneur, you have your own company, it's the successes that make you continue to wake up every morning and do it all over again. So that's the key for me.
definitely. And my last question is, can you share a funny story from your career? This is a tough one, I know.
I sorry, I can't think of one.
Okay.
Um,
I mean, the janitor's only filling the room up halfway was
I
pretty
mean, that was
funny.
hysterical, right? I just
Yeah.
that was so wonderful, and that was a very funny story. Um, I'm sure I have them. I've got plenty of them, I'm sure,
I
but I
know.
think I've blocked them all out. um, I can tell you how I started just my career in general.
Okay.
So I don't know if it's a funny story. I told my mother when I was 16, I went to with a civics class to Washington D.C. and a congressman. We went to visit a congressman, and the room was all full, and I'm pretty sure I was the only girl.
Wow.
So it was full, and the only chair left was his chair, a big chair behind the congressional desk, right? And so he said to this group of, shy kids from Ohio, hey, who's going to sit in my chair? And, we all like cowered back. And he pointed at me and said, you're going to be in my chair because I have this feeling you're going to be back someday. I went home to my
Wow.
mother and said, you know what I'm going to do after I graduate from college? I'm going to Washington, D.C., which I did. I packed up my little car after college and showed up in DC and pounded the pavement in, like the Senate office and literally tucked my way into the office. When I approached the one that I eventually worked for, um, the receptionist said, "And you're here for what?" And I said, "Well, I'm here to interview, or I'm just trying to get a position, do you have any openings?" And she said, "Get in line behind all the PhDs from Harvard." um, well, I just said, well, they may be smart, but I'm willing to do absolutely anything. Don't you have some rinky dinky job that nobody else wants to do? I'll do that one, right? And she got on the phone with the chief of staff at the time and just said, "You're gonna have to talk to this one. She's a hoot." And that's how I got my first job on Capitol Hill.
Oh my gosh, that is a great story. I can't believe that senator said you would be back and here you are. That is so cool.
There I am many years later. Yeah. So
Wow.
sometimes people are prophetic and just don't know it, right?
Exactly. I wonder if he ever knows.
I doubt it. I never was able to tell him because he left Congress before I like showed back up.
Well, maybe he's seen you on there, in there.
Maybe.
Do you have anything else you want to add or any last pieces of advice for the girls?
No, I don't know. Have we covered things that they might be interested in? Um,
I mean, I'm sure there are girls out there who are very interested in what you do in the government. If you want to talk a little bit about different positions there, different things they can do to get involved.
I just think that my last piece of advice is just follow your instincts. Nobody else can decide for you what you're going to do and how you're going to do it. So that doesn't mean don't take advice,
Mhm.
listen to advice, but in the end, it's you, right? It's not your parents, it's not your friends, it's you and it's your vision, and follow your instincts because that's what makes you successful.
That is a great last piece of advice to end on. Thank you so much for your time
You're
today.
welcome.